I want you to know how holy they are.
Right, exactly. And you weren't like that at all. It was like, oh, this is my name. This is what I do, yada, yada, yada. Oh, also some interesting facts about me. I went to seminary. And to me, that was a very interesting fact. I think I even looked at you like this and I was like, can I have you on my podcast?
Yeah. And meanwhile, on the other end, I was like, I really want to be on it. That's yes, 100%. Let's do it tomorrow. I'm trying to just check out the painting behind you. What's the comic part of it?
So my dad was an artist. He did like cartoons and comic strips and stuff. And so cool. In the scene, he is being, he's like on a board being like waterboarded by an evil squid doctor. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Cool. Just a random interrogation scene.
Yeah, that makes complete sense.
Yeah. All right. Well, Drew, thank you so much for agreeing to be on this podcast. I'm super stoked to have you as a guest. I saw you in person at a show about a month ago now, probably. Yeah. And ever since then, I think I added you on Facebook that night or the next day. Ever since then, you've just been blowing up my feed with so much like shows and touring and comedy stuff. And you're just busy. You're all over the place. But something that we talked about the night that I met you at the show here in Nashville was you mentioned your faith and you mentioned how important it is to you. And some of your bit was actually about being a Christian in comedy. And I just really wanted to get your perspective on what that's like, because as somebody who was very active in church in my early 20s as a comedian, a lot of people would think those two worlds completely conflict. They're like, wait a second, how do you navigate both without your entire set being just Christian-based comedy, performing at only Christian events? Mm-hmm. And so introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're going to be talking about today, and then we'll just dive right in.
I'm Drew Davis. I'm a comedian based out of Nashville, Tennessee. I used to be a youth pastor, so I have about 15 years of youth and young adult ministry experience, and also a seminary degree in youth ministry and undergrad in Bible with concentration youth ministry. But I also have 10 years of stand-up comedy experience. So and I recently, over the past month and a half, made the transition between youth ministry and into full-time stand-up comedian. So it was kind of like a side hustle and a recreational thing. Especially there's a point where I was trying to do youth ministry full-time, seminary full-time, and comedy, and like it dropped off so quickly for about 2016 to 2019, and we did our best. But and I am I'm a fan of this podcast. I know I told you that already, Sydney. Yay. So like it was so cool to meet you. You were headlining the show that we were at, and I got to do a cool guest spot for it at the Bowery Vault, which is a really cool spot here in Nashville. And like it was like a kind of starstruck moment for me, because like your podcast is one of the ones that I regularly listen to on driving to places and stuff like that. So it was just a cool thing. So I'm really happy to be here. But the question that you asked, at least the one that I'm remembering right now, and it kind of pertains, actually, it's a good kind of introduction to connecting ministry and being a Christian and stand-up comedy, is how do I reconcile the kind of the different worlds there? And I totally get that, and if I'm being honest, for the past, for the first 2 years of comedy, I didn't even mention Christianity or ministry experience. And at that point, I'd been doing it for a while, but I was just so nervous about like being in a completely different world. But ministry, or at least church culture, was part of the reason that I tried stand-up comedy for the first time about 10 years ago. I was working at a church in Richmond, Kentucky, which is kind of near Lexington, out in the middle of nowhere. I just, especially Christians will appreciate the Great Commission, like go and make disciples, how we're supposed to, as Christians, go and meet people that aren't Christians and do what we can to be a salt or a light, or help them grow in their lives. And I just had this realization moment, and I was like 23 or 24, but like everyone I knew was like exactly like me. Like I had this real, I was in this church bubble, and I realized that while I was literally at like a staff or an elders meeting at church, I was like, man, everyone here is like an older, younger version of me. I had my youth pastor friends, and like that each night I was doing Bible studies. Before that, I was in my college bubble. Before that, I was in like my church friend group bubble, even in high school. And it just hit me that like everyone I know probably is like a Christian or whatever. So like I'm spending all this time. I mean, it was literally my job to like help save people that were probably fine, like, so like,
yeah,
and I just had this realization that like, I just need to get out there. And so, I've always loved stand-up comedy. And I feel like a lot of people tell me when I was preaching, like I started preaching when I was like 16, and people were like, man, if preaching doesn't work out, you should try stand-up comedy, which I never really figured out if that was like an insult, like you're funny, but or if it was like I took it as a compliment. But so I went to like a comedy show at comedy off Broadway in Lexington, and then I just to check it out, and then I tried the open mic the next week and absolutely fell in love with it. But what ended up happening was I entered a world that was completely different with just the people I met. It was the best thing ever for me, because it just kind of created a space where we could meet people that was different than me, listen to and be entertained with different ideas than my own, grow from them. And it really felt like I'd finally found a point where I could, from a Christian perspective, go and live out the Great Commission. But also, like, I feel like just by meeting all the different people I've met over the past 10 years through stand-up comedy, and I've had other experiences like going to seminary and stuff like that, because I have an interest. I mean, I grew up in 8th grade, I started going to a very, like, I guess the word we'd use on this podcast, fundamental or conservative, or I went to a very conservative, non-denominational church, which was very good for me. But I also grew up with like a Catholic Democrat mom who's like very Italian and woman empowering. So there were several times where I'd bring home things from church, and it's like, yeah, we don't believe that at this household. Like, she would just, you're not allowed to, so like that. But then I went to a more open and liberal Christian college, and that was able to kind of help give me permission to like believe or speak about the thing. In college, a big one for me is like, oh, like women can speak at churches. Like I always knew that it was possible, but like now I have validation. And then even in seminary, it took it a step further about just a lot of liberation theology, which is big in my own life. So, but I do feel like along the same lines, like stand-up comedy was one of the first ways that I was able to grow as a person, just through the other people that I met. So
interesting. And now you said that seminary helped you like liberalize your beliefs.
Yes,
that's interesting. I did not expect to hear that.
Yeah, so I should say that. So I had a non-denominational background. I mean, every church I'd gone to and worked at was non-denominational. Even my college was very non-denominational. A little bit, the non-denominational churches look at it as like a very liberal college, but like in comparison, I don't, not as liberal as other places, I guess, but
like a liberal in terms of Christian colleges.
Yes, absolutely. And then I went to a Presbyterian seminary, which for non-denominational was like very. And for the past 6 years, I worked at a Methodist church. So like,
those are the liberals.
Yeah. So I really did kind of get into the more, and it was good. That was empowering for me, because a lot of the things I was reading and the professors I was having, or just the role models I was meeting, were speaking truth to things that I already kind of believed in, like things about like I think I love as Christians, any kind of like allyship or partnering with people, especially people that maybe Jesus would call like the least of these, or in the culture that people kind of put down. I think like those should be like the target audiences that Christians are going out and like connecting with the most, and showing love in a way that they don't. And unfortunately, sometimes in the church, those are also some of the people that were pushing away the most unintentionally, either unintentionally or intentionally, depending on the people. So I've always had a problem with that. And I feel like college and seminary and just people I met through Methodist and Presbyterian influences were able to give me the words and the understanding, where I didn't feel like, oh, maybe I'm just being a bad Christian for feeling this is wrong. It was the same in undergrad, when like I met so many amazing like women going into ministry, or professors that would teach about how it's not a sin for women to preach and stuff like that, which were things I already felt. But like growing up, that was kind of always like I felt like, am I the first person to think this? Like so like it was stuff like that. So yeah, it just kind of gave me permission to I don't know, God gave us brains and thinking and stuff like that. So sometimes when we come up with things that we think are wrong and aren't correct or aren't Christ-like by how we understand it, like it's tempting. I feel like, and especially younger people are like, well, if this is what the church says and this is what I have to believe, or if this is what the church, as all the churches I've been going to, without actually reading into scripture and Christianity and stuff like that, and just assuming it, that's where it can get a little dangerous.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like that lesson, the one where a lot of conservative churches say like women shouldn't preach, women shouldn't proselytize. I think that I've heard, especially with myself, that is the lesson where a lot of people start questioning, where a lot of people start saying things like, wait a second. So if my grandma tells me about Jesus, that doesn't count. If the pastor's wife like tells me something very interesting or teaches me about the Lord, that doesn't count. And so I think it's very interesting that you brought that up kind of as an example. So you were obviously very heavily steeped in religion, in Christianity primarily. What was the first, or has there ever been, I should say, a moment where Christianity and stand-up comedy really conflicted, where you were like, I'm not sure if this is where I'm meant to be because this particular reason?
Yeah, I feel like, especially in the last 6 years in the church I worked at, that was a big theme that it was, and I should say it was a lot of it was self-imposed. I was blessed to work at a church where like they knew I did stand-up comedy on the side, and they were fine with it, encouraged it. A lot of the kids or whatever thought it was kind of cool that I did that. But there's always the thing that like you don't want the places you're performing at or the jokes you might do, or like just you don't want to accidentally send the wrong message to these people that you feel called to connect with and to minister to. And so the question, especially when I was in grad school and even when I was doing ministry, was how can you be a stand-up comedian and a youth pastor at the same time? And like a lot of people would ask the same question, like, are you sure you're doing the right thing? You should be. I'll never forget. This is such a dumb example of this because there's so much more informed and better times, but this is the one that sticks out. I remember I was on some kind of like dating site, and this woman saw like all the interests I had, and I did stand-up comedy and youth pastor, and she like sent me this message where she was like, how do you have the time and the audacity to like every time you're doing comedy you're not pastoring these children, like you should be praying for them 24/7, not going out and having like a nightlife. And like it was like this long message, like, and it was like not even just like in conversation, it was like the first thing that she sent me, and it was just so funny. But there's like a lot of times this pressure that like, can I be a stand-up comedian and also a pastor at the same time? And when I I took some time, when I moved back to Nashville after living in Kentucky for a bit, I took some time away from a career youth ministry. I still did it. I was very active at the church I was going to. I was essentially like an unpaid like middle school pastor. I did a lot of the ministry there, and which was good. It kind of kept me connected in it and everything like that. But when I got involved and I moved back to West Tennessee and started seminary and stuff like that, that was when I was really pressured to like, do I do comedy or do I do ministry? And what I eventually learned, it was like over 6 years, is both make me better at each. So doing stand-up comedy has made me a better pastor because it helped me, and not just in I'm funnier when I'm speaking, like giving sermons or whatever. It's helped me connect with people better. It's helped me read the room better.
That crowd work.
Be more tolerant and understanding. And more accepting and better at loving people, which is like a big deal for that's like Christianity rule number one is loving everybody. And like, I feel like comedy has put me in situations where I've learned how to just be more loving. And then youth ministry, I'm discovering that like all the things that like I used to do intentionally for my job as a youth pastor, like in comedy, not so much in the performing part, but in the, interacting with people, like being a supportive comedian, being just friendly to people, being connecting with others, all the things that make you a good youth pastor, turns out we want as adults as well. And so like the same skill sets come in handy every night when I'm interacting with people. And then of course there's as soon as you're a you mentioned a youth pastor joke or whatever, everyone after the show wants to come up and give you their opinion on Christianity and their stories of their faith and their questions or their concerns. And so just having the knowledge to be able to answer those and address those no matter how tired I am or how much I feel like I bombed, I don't want to talk to anyone ever. So.
Yeah, and there's also the idea that I feel like hanging out with large groups of comedians is not unlike hanging out with large groups of teenagers and children. There's just more alcohol, I think, around.
Yeah, I think so. Hopefully,
hopefully.
So hopefully there's a difference.
Well, that's very interesting. And has there ever on like I know that they're on an operational level, like schedule wise, and which should you prioritize and that sort of thing, and outward, what does it look like to the people you are either telling jokes to or ministering? Has there ever been like an internal struggle or like a personal struggle there where you're like, for this particular reason or this particular event, I don't know that this is what I'm meant to be doing?
Absolutely. So when I was employed as a youth pastor, I knew specific venues or shows or spaces that I just needed not to go to. I mean, not that it would be a problem, but perception of other people, like from other people. I mean, you know, when your job is to be like a pastor somewhere, those people should be the ones you should be concerned about the perception of them.
Right. And the ones who pay your bills.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and because you have a job to do, and if doing this comedy show at this place will, you know, make me less effective at my job, then when I've agreed to take that job, it's important. Or like even, and then especially with the scheduling conflicts, I mean, you know, Sundays and Wednesdays are a pretty big deal for youth pastors, Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights. So like in all of my scheduling over the past 6 years, like I would turn down things to make sure I was back in church time, because that was my first priority. And then there was a point, you know, that I decided that like it was time for me to be done with youth ministry and go full time with comedy. And some good advice someone gave me was about when you're deciding to be a full-time comic is when you're turning down enough work because of your day job, that might be the time to look into not doing the day job. And so it got to that point for me. I didn't feel like I was quitting or like burning out, or like I don't have like, people always ask me, I used to be youth pastor, like, oh, do you have a negative church experience? I didn't. I just felt like my time as a pastor was done. It was like the end of a good TV show. Like I never wanted to be a burnout pastor where like you look back and you just hate like everything about it. And in my mid-20s, I had a story about that where it seemed like I burned out, and then I got back into it. And now I can feel like I can say I left like on really good terms, and like that I felt like I finished the job I was supposed to be doing, and now I'm in a new season of life. But I will say though, I do think one thing I consider to this day is when I'm posting content, because like, you know, a lot of the shows I do now, like I don't have a limit to the places I perform at. I don't, you know, like if they want me to come, I'll come perform. I will not be picky. I have a lot more time to book shows now, so I'd happily take anywhere. But I think about how like even like on my Instagram, like I know I have like middle schoolers and high schoolers that are following me. I know on my Facebook, like their parents of kids I pastored for the past 6 years and beyond that are following me. So like, you know, like I'll use a great example. Last week I performed at a bar show in Salem, Illinois, and it was a great time. I had a blast with the crowd, and we had a lot of fun. But like, I allowed myself to like to be probably dirtier than people want me to be as a pastor, and I didn't feel like, oh, I'm not these people's youth pastor, so it was fine. But at the same time, I'm not gonna like post those videos and like tag all my kids and their parents and stuff like that, because I mean, I don't feel like, you know, I was living in sin, but I also don't want to, you know, be offensive to like people off stage, you know, like, or on stage, I guess too. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. As somebody who a lot of the people that follow me on social media are teachers that work with my mom, people I used to go to church with, people that I met through, you know, my own youth ministry, people that I met through my hometown. And there are certain things that just because you don't post it doesn't mean you're hiding it, doesn't mean you're being secret about it, doesn't mean, you know, you're doing something wrong. But there's a lot of content that I'll perform live that I won't post on my YouTube channel, or I won't put on my TikTok, because I feel like if you have the ability to self-edit and include everyone in your content, why would you want to not do that? You know,
Yeah.
if you can have the best of both worlds, if you can perform whatever content you want, and I don't even get that dirty at all.
Yeah.
But there's just content that I don't want somebody's grandma, you know, to
Yeah,
watch or
absolutely.
whatever, or like my old babysitter.
And we
But
do
it's
that, like we do that in all aspects of life.
all
Non-comedians do
aspects of
this
life
all the time. The
all
people
the
you hang
time.
out with, and it's just and it's
You yeah,
yeah.
you're not the same person in front of your parents that you are with your friends.
Yeah,
Even
and you
if
can
you
even
guys are
argue it's biblical. Even in the Bible, it talks about like if you're something you do causes someone to stumble, don't do it around those people, even if it's
right.
okay. Like
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's a really good kind of like rule to live by, is that you don't necessarily have to deprive yourself 24/7 of certain venues or activities or vocabulary, but you also don't have to personify it and project it as your entire brand. You can
yeah,
have both.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So
Yeah. And that's why there are certain pages that this podcast goes on, and there are certain pages that it doesn't, because
yeah,
yeah.
that's fine. Yeah.
So what are some common misconceptions that you've run into, say, from other comedians when they find out that you are a devout Christian?
Okay, so the biggest one is if I like when I say I'm a Christian, all the whoever's on the other side of that conversation already has a preconceived ideas of what that means based off of their own experiences, whether it's good or bad with people of faith. So in the comedy world, a lot. I mean, this was the first time I had this experience, but I remember several years ago. I was driving. I was doing a show in Nashville with a comedian from Memphis. We didn't know each other that well, but we had done several open mics together. So I was like, "Yeah, come on." And so there was. I learned the life lesson of if you're doing a road trip with someone, make sure you know them well enough where it's not a weird road trip. Didn't have that yet. So like
I learned that the hard way too. I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
Right there with you.
And so we were just getting to know each other outside of comedy. And so so of course I was, working at church, going to seminary at the time. So I talked about Christianity, how faith's important to me. And her exact response was like, "Oh, you're a Christian, but you don't look like you hate gay people." Like right away, that was her first thing she said. And I was like, well, that's not part of the definition of being a Christian.
I'm glad that I don't look
right.
like a homophobe,
yeah,
but
right, yeah.
I'm still concerned.
And then in a lot of the same ways, when you say you're a Christian, people oftentimes, especially if they're not Christians, they assume, well, that must mean you're really conservative. You vote Republican. You're very anti this group of people. And then sometimes some Christians because like sometimes it's a relief to a comedian who is more faithful and like, oh, you're a Christian too, and maybe they're like way more conservative than me personally. Or maybe there's someone who's like, yeah, women should never preach, and this is what the Bible says about this group of people, and then they hear I'm a Christian, and like, oh man, this guy probably agrees with every single thing I say. And like as we get into the conversation, I play the game of like, how quickly can I make this person think I'm going to hell without? But so it often the hardest thing is when someone has this is what a Christian is, good or bad, and they just assume that's you. And I feel like, especially as a I guess progressive or more open-minded or liberal Christian, whatever you want to call it, not a lot of people like nail down my beliefs right away when they hear I'm a Christian, and it can be confusing for people. I don't mean it to be confusing. I'm just it's just what I believe and who I am.
Humans
and stuff like that.
Complex creatures,
yeah,
we're all confusing.
But what I noticed, a lot of the thing that I see most common, and I feel like this podcast has helped given me the perspective of this just from listening to the different guests that you have. So many people have bad perceptions about Christianity and like as a whole God because of bad church experiences they've had, or
right.
bad Christians they've met, or crappy upbringing experiences with it. And I'm really sensitive to that, and but to me, like, especially now that I have like education and experience in it, like I'm always like, well, I'm usually listening to your podcast when I'm like driving for hours on the roads, and I'm like yelling to no one in particular. I'm like, yeah, but you're wrong. That's not Christianity. That's not, those people were incorrect too. And I get the weirdness of saying that because Bible's open up to a lot of interpretation, And so like the same person who's, you know, giving this wrong interpretation of the Bible, or like unloving interpretation of the Bible, or mean interpretation of the Bible that has really messed it up for this person, you know, talking about it, like their opinion is just the same as my opinion. We're both interpreting it. But then there's like I don't know if it's the arrogant or the correct part of me that's like, yeah, but I'm educated in it, or like I've had classes in this, like,
Right.
and but there's so many people justify doing really mean and hateful things, are believing mean and hateful things, and they're like, well, that's because the Bible tells us to. And I'm like, no, that's just bad teaching from generations.
Like, no,
you know,
you would just be mean even if you weren't a Christian. You'd
yeah.
be finding a different reason to not like gay people or whatever.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
this just
And
happens to be a good blanket for you.
And I feel like as a Christian, I am able to, through the places I go with stand-up comedy, stand-up comedy, whatever it's called, through the places I go, I'm able to hopefully little by little just share a different interpretation of my faith walk. To hopefully people are like, for some people they get like they think to maybe give it a second chance, or like
absolutely.
just have a better understanding of faithful people. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like informed consent and informed knowledge is some of the most important aspects of being a human being, whether you are religious or you're not religious, or you are political or you're not political. I think knowing where you stand based on facts and information is very, very important. And so I do think it is important to expose yourself to people who you think off the cuff up top don't agree with you on a lot of things, because one thing I found, especially through this podcast, is that a lot of us, conservative religious, moderately religious, atheist, agnostic, a lot of us actually agree on a lot of the same things. We just aren't usually in a place where we can have these conversations. It's usually the internet, you know. It's rare that we're ever all like in a room together with a cup of coffee, just chit-chatting for some time, going back and forth, you know, with a moderator. And so I think that's really noble of you to be like, this is what I think. This is what I am educated in. This is the knowledge that I have on this subject. I would love to reintroduce it to you. Do with that what you will. You know, ask me questions if you're more curious, or if you don't agree, but you still want to talk about it. I'm happy to talk about our disagreements and our differences. I think that's really important. And I think that's awesome.
And I think it's something that I believe more in now. And I feel like it's actually makes for better ministry, if I'm talking to the Christian audiences here, but like, there was always, especially, you know, growing up in a more conservative church, there's always the push to evangelize or whatever, to like turn every conversation, every whatever into like a sales pitch for Jesus or whatever. But the Bible is so clear about like the importance of like the Holy Spirit in that experience, which is not me, you know, like that. I don't have that convicting power or whatever, which is good because everyone I would convict then would look exactly the same as me and it wouldn't be great. But I've learned that like the most important thing you can do is like have meaningful relationships with people based off of like genuine caring and love, and not like, well, I'm going to use this to turn you into a Christian kind of thing. So like I feel like especially when you're in situations where you're like around people that have completely different opinions than you, like turning every conversation into a sales pitch does nothing but hurt your cause. Like,
no, you're not going to get invited to any more parties. You're going to get booked a lot less.
Yes. So, but and I love what you said about the importance of listening to people who have different opinions than you. When I was in seminary, that was like kind of my first forced experience where like my first year in seminary, I was in a room full of really smart and well-educated Christians that were so completely different than me. And like some of the things that I would hear in class or from the other students, I would be so uncomfortable. And then like I learned to give myself permission to be like, well, I don't have to agree with this. Or I learned to like give it a shot and then later be like, oh, that actually is really helpful. And I do agree with this. And like, I just think it's we're conditioned, or like at least it's easy to just be around people that think exactly the same as us and never ask any questions, and just not like the people that don't believe the same thing of us without actually having ever had a conversation with those people.
Right.
You know?
And it's easy to proselytize when you know you're in a safe room full of people who are going to agree with you, you know,
absolutely.
and not like argue with you. Would you say that there is any aspect of Christianity that you still to date are like, I can't agree with that aspect, or surely that means something different, or I think it's unfortunate that it's that way, or do you find that it's pretty easy to live by in your opinion?
So I feel like there's in a lot of conversations, I'm okay with if we're talking about something scripture wise or something God related, or someone has a good question, like, and we do our best to have a conversation about it. Sometimes I'm okay with the answer, I don't know. Like in the
Good.
Bible, you see some of the
Yes.
and actually I feel like in one of your earlier podcasts, you and the guest talked about that too. But that's so true. Like in the Bible, plenty of people in the Bible around Jesus like were like, I don't know, and it was fine. Like, and so I just feel like we need to be more comfortable with the fact that like you know, we do our best to understand things and to grow and to do our like just to learn and to know the things that we're supposed to know. But like it's impossible as a human to know every single thing. So sometimes in conversations ending it with like, I don't know, that'll give me
Yeah.
something to think about is totally fine. I do believe that there are like the core teachings of the Bible, like the real basic stuff, that the kind of things that every Christian denomination, the liberal and the conservative ones, would all agree on. I think about the kind of things that I used to have to teach, like in confirmation class, which are like the basics of Christianity, like the kind of things that you could go into any church and like that's true. And I mean, it's like the most basic stuff, like, you know, Jesus is important, God created things, love people, you know, like not like you know, not the things that we argue and debate about all the time. And to me, those are the things you're never going to get into arguments about, because like everyone of faith like agrees on them.
Right.
And then two, like when you get those things down, the rest of the stuff really doesn't matter as much. And so like, I think there's some things that we can debate about and converse about, and maybe even get to the point where we don't actually have a solid answer on, but we have our own interpretations and understanding and do our best. And then as long as we're still holding true to the main things, to me, you know, Jesus says, love God and love others. So like, to me, those are like kind of the big deal. As long as you're doing that, everything else will fall into place.
Yeah. Yeah. Someone once explained it to me. I asked a similar question. They said, if at any point what I'm being told goes against the love everyone aspect of faith, then I don't add that to my repertoire of Christian beliefs.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was pretty reasonable.
And I think when it comes to understanding the Bible, the two words that have helped me out a lot. But this is also where some people will listen to this podcast maybe like, I completely disagree with that, and that's totally fine. You're allowed to. But like a lot of people look at the Bible as inerrant, as in like there are no errors in their writing whatsoever.
Literalists.
Literalists. You know, when they were writing about good ways of having slaves, like you got it. Yep. Or when they were writing about these, you know, you just got to live into that, and then it really doesn't kind of address some of the textual inconsistencies that pop up either. It's just, well, we're just dumb enough and can't understand it, but everything here is without error. And I don't view it that way. I view it in the other word is infallible, which means like the word of God never fails. So the truths you find behind the messages are going to be consistent across the ages. And so that allows me to read things like when I read about Paul giving me good advice on how to be a slave owner, I can accept the reality that in his day, he never knew a reality where people didn't own slaves. When he gave that really sexist like advice on women not, you know, doing things, he couldn't imagine a world where there'd be like women preachers, or maybe he was speaking specifically to the context and he was, you know, just for this moment, not like as a whole general, you should do this all the time. And it gives me just a little bit more wiggle room to understand the Bible. And if you believe the Bible, the word of God is infallible, not only do you still find strength in it, but you also get less upset and less defensive when people have different opinions. And you're okay not having all the answers, which I think is healthy. Like,
absolutely. I've always felt that in my previous episodes, I've talked about how I always trust people more when they admit they don't know something. And I usually feel that defense comes from a place of not knowing. And there are some people who, like you, are like, that's a great question, I have no idea. And there are other people who think, he's going to think I'm dumb, or he's calling me an idiot if I don't know the answer to this. So I'm just going to get defensive and make it sound like I'm really like strongly behind this and I believe it. When I think,
and they miss stuff up. I'll give you a great ministry tip for you and anyone listening. This is like youth ministry 101 right here. So if you're ever having a conversation with someone and they ask you a question and you have no idea, the trick is to say like, I don't know, but I'm going to go look it up and then I'm going to get back to you. And then you go like look it up,
Yep.
you form an opinion, you know, even if you don't have all the answers, you figure out what you can figure out, then you like text them or call them or whatever, and you share the information that you got and you share your interpretation on it. And then you turn around like, so what do you think?
Yeah.
And that is such a great way to continue that
Yes.
conversation
Yes.
with them.
The follow-up makes
Yeah.
the biggest difference, because anybody
Absolutely.
can say, oh, I don't know, I'll get back to you, and then never
Yeah.
get back to you. But somebody
Absolutely.
who really believes in what it is they're saying will actually follow up with you and give
Yeah.
you the answer that they found, knowing that there's a chance you might not agree or you might not like that answer. Interesting. That's so fascinating. Now, as a Christian, do you personally believe that there are aspects of life that Christianity does not belong in? And I'll give you examples. For example, I know a lot of people that believe that Christianity and psychology should not go hand in hand. Like, you should not see a Christian psychologist, things like that.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that? Do you disagree? Do you have, like, what's your opinion in terms of, does Christianity belong in everything?
Yeah, so I have an opinion on that. I think your worldview or whatever, or your view of your personal view of Christianity informs all of your decisions you make and how you see things and stuff like that. Which is why, like, even though like I don't like it when politicians use like Christianity or faith to like manipulate you to vote for them.
Right.
I do think if you're a Christian, that should inform like the decisions you make and why you're voting for, or why you think the way you think. I do, and I do believe that, like, you know, God gave us a brain, so like science is a thing that shouldn't be you can believe in science, and you know, whether it's evolution or other forms of science. I'm not very good at science, so that I can't go much further with that. But you can believe in that and still believe that God gave us that and gave us smart people to come up with that. I was floored by during COVID when people were so anti-vaccine because they were like, this isn't from God or like whatever. But I'm like, God gave those scientists a brain. And I actually have a friend who his parents are like in the medical profession, and they have other Christian associates that were part of the vaccine making process. And if you talk to those people, they're talking about how God was all over the process. But you talk to people who are like, no, God couldn't. Anyway, it's crazy. But I do think God had, like, it's okay to realize that God gave us these gifts, whether it's through psychology or science or intellect. But I'll take it a step further, which might sometimes when I go a step further, it seems like I'm going backwards, and I try not to, but that's just the way it is. So if I was looking for a therapist, I probably wouldn't go straight with just a Christian therapist. And psychologist or for like something like that, because in my experience, like just saying like all you need to do is pray is not breaking down the deeper factors of, right. You know, like I want someone who could help me understand my mental health. I want someone to give me like true, real practicing tools to do things. I really do value. I think God gave us all those forms of like intellect and scholarship. And to say none of them are valid because it gets in the way of like our faith, I think that's cheapening faith. I think that's cheapening God, and I think that's also just a disservice to yourself as well. Yeah. So like, yeah. I would never hire someone just because Christian is next to their name, because like I feel like if all you do is say like you just need to pray more, man. Like I'm like, well, no, I could use some more help than that. So
yeah. It's like that. I don't know if you've ever heard that old fable of the man dying of thirst on the side of the road, you know, and one helper stops and they're like, oh my God, can I get you water? And he's like, no, the Lord will deliver me. And so he lays there. Second man comes by. Would you like some water? No, the Lord will deliver me. Third man comes by. Would you like some water? No, the Lord will deliver me. So he dies. He goes to heaven. Yeah. Jesus is like, I don't understand. Why are you here? And the man's like, well, you didn't deliver to me. You didn't deliver to me. And Jesus says, I sent you 3 people with water. Like, what are you talking about? And I thought of that story the whole time during the height of the pandemic, when people were like, no, this isn't of God. This isn't of God. I'm like, if you believe in God, then you should believe that God delivered these doctors here to save us. What are you talking about?
Yeah, 100%.
Delivered a vaccine.
I totally, I believe that. And I'm very grateful for like the Christian education that I was able to have through college and seminary, and those really smart people, and like all the readings that we would have to do, like that's all God working through scholarship, you know. And then and so like I just I don't like it when people separate like creation and science, like, you know. I just think like you're cheapening all of it. So.
Yeah. And I remember even at my most devout, when I was my most devout Christian, I remember being confused by why we couldn't believe that God created the animal that then evolved into what it is today. I remember thinking like, why can't we all agree that he created the original thing and it changed over time? We all change over time. Like we witness it, you know, our nails grow, our hair grows, we get older, we change. Like, why can we not agree that he at least created the first version and it just changed with weather and time and
absolutely
location?
And I think creation is a wonderful example of something where you can get bogged down on side details and miss the bigger point. So like the side details is, did we evolve, or were we just, you know, created the way we were? And then people get really bogged down on that and argue and fight over it. And what I used to love it when, you know, professors would take whatever the issue is and then like say like, whether this is true or this is true, you can see the truth in God in this. And it's like the greater truth is that however we were created and however we grew, there was a being that was so powerful and so loving. He created us in his image, and when he looks at us, sees our value and sees our craftsmanship. And like whether you started out one way and ended in a certain way, or however we came from, like we were created by God, which gives like us value in the eyes of God. And when you get so bogged down on like how we were created, you forget the important part, which is we were created, and what's that mean for me in my life today? Like that.
Like looking a gift horse in the mouth. You're like, but how? You're like, but we were, but how? I'm not gonna be happy until I know how. Have you ever heard an argument or a point made by an atheist or an agnostic or a non-religious person where you're like, that's a good point? Like, that's a great question.
100%. The good point. And like, but like we said earlier, sometimes I'm okay with just not having the problems, or not having the answers, rather. I have plenty of the problems.
Yeah, you're like, I got all the problems.
And sometimes I just leave it to like, yeah, that's fine, you know. But so some of the best points that I feel like come from like atheists or people that critique the Bible or have a hard time is when, you know, the universal question, you know, why do bad things happen, right? Like that is, and I've learned in times of bad things, that is a terrible time to answer that question. When someone just lost a relative, that's a terrible time to try to, you know, preach to them. And like, your best role as a Christian is just to be there with them, be supportive, be caring. You don't need to change their minds on why bad things happen to good people. And then I also can understand when people have a hard time justifying or reconciling with like in the Bible, sometimes you see like a vengeful God, or you see like the tough things, especially in the Old Testament, but then you're in the New Testament, it seems like it's so much about like love and forgiveness and things like that. And like I feel like I've heard great interpretations and understandings and lectures and things like that on the Bible as a whole, where it bothers me less now than I feel like I see it bothers other people who haven't had all that. But like that's still like a good point. Like I think what we see sometimes, which isn't correct, is when someone has an issue or a problem, to like, we feel like if we acknowledge that's an issue or a problem, then we're like being less faithful to God or less good Christian. Instead, we should acknowledge the reality of like, that's a good question, that's a good issue, that's a very relatable situation. And it should be either like, let's figure it out together, or just like acknowledge, like you're dehumanizing the person when you're like, well, that's stupid. As a Christian, you shouldn't be wondering that. One of my favorite things when I was a youth pastor was giving students space to ask questions.
Yes,
and I've heard so many instances of people asking questions in church and being shot down by it, but like what a great opportunity to really make faith relevant to them.
Exactly. And I think you're right about that. In a lot of the stories that I've heard from people, both in this podcast and outside of this podcast, they do bring up the gender thing, you know, the day that they learned that women were supposed to preach. And then the other thing they bring up is every time I would ask a question, I would either get what I know was lied to, you know, like some big, like fluffy answer that didn't actually answer the question, or I would basically get chastised for asking that question, and it was made to feel more like I had an attitude or I was being disruptive. And so it's neat to hear you kind of address that head on, because that's and I feel like that sucks from all aspects, like whether you're a Democrat and you hear somebody had like a really crappy interaction with a Democrat and you're like, oh, like I wish it wasn't like that, or women and men, or members of the LGBT community, or Americans, you hear people's, you know, their experiences with Americans. I imagine that being a devout Christian is very much the same way. Like you said, you know, you listen to the podcast and you like yell into the void. You're like, no, that's not, like, I see what you're saying, but that's not correct. Like I get has there ever been a time where being a Christian has been very, very frustrating, and like you were almost like upset that you needed to be one?
Yeah, but I feel like in hindsight, like it was all like stupid stuff on my part. Like, I feel like, especially when I was younger, it was like, I feel like the ways that we're taught and called to live is better for us, but sometimes when we're around everyone else doing different things, it's like, man, I wish you could be doing what they're doing. And I had
FOMO.
And so I've had many experiences like that where this is a terrible example, but like there are times when I see like guys, especially like in the comedy scene, that are like much more like, for lack of a better word, like studly with women, and like get more ladies or whatever. The more I talk about it, the more you're like, he doesn't get any ladies. Like there's no good word.
Getting
but,
ladies, like, are we?
So yeah. And it's like, I think sometimes like, man, if I was just a jerk that just objectified them and treated them like meat, I would like be so much more successful in this. But the problem is like when women meet me, I'm like boring and like respectful. And like, especially in my early 20s, like I feel like that was when we just people were the dumbest, you know, sometimes. And so like I've had thoughts like that before. And so I think sometimes living a Christian life, you need to recognize that, like, I mean, if you look at scripturally, there is talk of like things will be tough because you're different.
Right.
And that's true for anything though, but like all good things are usually difficult. Like anything that has hassle is usually worth the issue. So
So, nothing worth having is easy.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of how I feel about that. But I've had time. I think everyone's had times, and that's okay. You know?
Yeah. And I told somebody just last night, I said, our early 20s are when we know everything.
Of course.
And yet we know nothing. And our 30s are when we know so much about stuff that we realize we know nothing. We know nothing.
I feel like just the smarter you get, the more you realize how little you know. That's part of growth. And I remember I started being a youth pastor at 19 years old, Sydney. That was like way too young to be a youth pastor.
That is too young.
It is too young.
That is too young to be leading sheep to the pasture.
Yes, I was like a year removed from being in youth group, and I was like, all right, I guess I'm leading this now. But I remember, like, I just think back to like my early 20s as a youth pastor, and like how certain I was about like all this stuff, and like in hindsight, like, whew.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So and it's so funny though, because like you talk to comedians and they talk about their early 20s as a comedian, and it's like the same thing. Like you talk to, you know, parents who start off when they're early 20s with their kids, and they look back to like, you know, how they were as a parent. It's like we all were like that. And I feel like a part of growing up is like being better than that, but also accepting like, yeah, it happens.
Right. Being like a smart, intelligent adult is being like, look, I was an idiot. I apologize for the things that I need to apologize for, and for the things that I don't, I still am not going to do again. So I've learned, I've changed.
Yeah. And then you talk to like you talk to 20-year-olds, and they're like, that was true for you, but not for me.
Yeah, but I'm different.
Like, a few years ago, I had the opportunity to be a coach to like new youth pastors who are like in their early 20s. And those conversations sometimes are the worst. And
Yes.
for me, the hardest part was like, I heard my voice in them. Like I was
Yes.
exactly there where they were like, this is how I'm going to do it. It's going to be fantastic. I'm going to say this one thing and everyone's going to believe me. I'm going to reform and change the entire church that's been around for so many years and no one else is completely reforming, but now I'm here and it's going to just, we're going to fix everything. And like, you can't be like, look, it's not going to work exactly like that.
It's just, I like not long ago, maybe like 2 years ago, I had to talk this 20-year-old off a ledge because he was in film school and he was going to write this like sassy email to his film school professor because his film school professor was like disrespecting him and was like grading him harder because he knew he was like better than everyone in that class and he was taking it out on him because he was jealous and all this stuff. And I read the email and I looked at him and I was like, I am begging you with the 30-year-old soul that you will be one day, please don't send that email. Please don't send that email. I was like, trust me. I was like, I know I'm not trying to demoralize you. Like, I know that it's so real to you and I know that it hurts. And I know that you feel like you are so correct right now and injustice has been served. And I don't doubt that that has you fuming. But as the 21-year-old who sent those emails, don't send that email. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Did he send or
I don't know. I don't know if I don't think he did. I think I successfully talked him off a ledge, but I was like, I promise you, I'm not trying to do that thing where I'm like, when I was your age, but I can tell you when I was your age, I would have sent that email and older me regrets every single one of those emails because I promise you, the notes and the advice you're getting from your professor will be very handy one day. I look back on my work that I swear was like I was Hemingway, right? Reimagined. I was the next, and I look back on the notes and I'm like, these are decent notes and my writing was shit like this. But I was 100%. So mad because they were jealous of me, you know?
I was the same way as a comedian too. Like there were so many, when I first started in the Nashville scene, so many comedians did their best with my little arrogant self.
They try and we have to wake up in a cold sweat cringing in our 30s in order to really understand. Yes. Oh God. Yeah. I've spent so much, I'm only 30 and I have spent so much of my 30s already, like apologizing to people for dumb shit that I did. But you'll learn from it and you don't do it.
You wouldn't know now as well. Cause I do feel like for better or for worse, we learn the best through experience. Like we learn, you'll never make those mistakes again, you know, because you learn them the hard way. You'll always, if you didn't, you would always be wondering, but like, maybe I was different. Like, no, you weren't different, but now you know for sure.
Right. And if I didn't have that searing shame to keep me from acting like that again, I would keep acting like that. You know, you can say all you want, like, oh, I would go back in time and I would change. Don't change it, because that wound, that scar, that like embarrassment is what's gonna like keep you from ever doing it again.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Well, so what are your, in the next, say, 5 to 10 years, what are your goals as a comedian, as a human being, as a Christian in general? What do you hope the next few years have in store for you?
So I really do in picturing the next 5 to 10 years, I will be pursuing stuff like comedy and entertainment related. Like, I don't think there'll be like another shift where I go back into the church for a few years or like vocational ministry. And I really do feel like the last time I left, the door was kind of like awkwardly still there, but like I really do feel like a state of completion on my ministry in a church time. And now I do feel fully confident and empowered that like comedy and entertainment, that's where I need to be. So since I'm a month and a half, maybe 2 months into like doing it full time, like I would love to be like support myself more than I am right now with what I'm doing. Like, so there's a lot of area to growth as far as being a professional comedian and what my job looks like and stuff like that. And I'm really kind of furthering myself a lot in that, learning. I'm like in like, it's weird. Like I'm in like acting classes. I'm doing like freelance writing. Like I'm like,
that's cool.
Doing all kinds of things that we'll see, you know, like but it's, I mean, there's all stuff like I hear that people do in the same like line of work that I'm in and stuff like that. So I hope to see more growth and development in my career in that kind of way. Like I'm still really new to being like full-time into comedy and stuff like that. And but then to like look a little broader, I really do find a lot of value in like living a Christian lifestyle in whatever you're doing. And there's just the way I've grown as a person and as a Christian. I feel like maybe even like in pastoral kind of ways, like I really felt comfortable saying that. Like I feel like where I am right now in my own life, I'm able to be a better pastor, for lack of a better word. I use it as like the original use of the word pastor. I'm able to be a better person who shares Jesus with other people as a not pastor in a church. And so like I'm excited to be able to just be that good influence in what I'm doing. And I really through just being supportive in the comedy scene with other comedians, through interacting with people who maybe hear my material, and then we have like the side conversations afterwards, through things like really awesome things like this podcast, like things like this, just through the experiences I have, that I'm still able to share my faith, still able to share positivity and like loving God and loving others. Like I feel like, which is like the most important thing of being a Christian. And I look forward to, I really do feel like going the direction I'm going, I'll be able to continue that. A lot of people are like, oh, why are you like leaving, sharing God with people? I'm like, it's not what it is at all. Like, you know,
like, that is a very aggressive way to take what it is that's happening in your life. Like that's...
it was so interesting when I first like quote unquote went public with my decision to leave the church I was working at and go into comedy. I still had like several months at the church I was working at, which is really uncomfortable and slow and weird. It was good. There was a lot of good that came from it. But like, talk about awkward. Talk about awkward. But I would frequently get questions like, you're going from like sharing Jesus with people to making people laugh. Like are you sure you're doing as important work in what you're doing? And then like a few weeks in, when I was like a few weeks later, I was like traveling and doing comedy, and it was in Cincinnati after like an open mic or whatever. I'd done jokes about like being a youth pastor or whatever. And then this woman and her daughter, who was, you know, I don't know, like early 20s, 19, 10, I don't know. She was young. And so she shows up, and like this woman, like, well, you're a youth pastor, so could you like pray for us? And here's why. And she goes into this like long story about like her daughter had like this heart condition and couldn't do a lot, but they loved coming to comedy every week. And like, this was like her favorite part. She like loved laughing and stuff like that. And then, but also like, but then she was like, but she's got a big procedure coming up and stuff like that. And so it was just, I was able to have like the youth pastor or young adult pastor conversation with these people while at the place I was performing at. And it's like stuff like that happens all the time. And you don't have to just like work at a church to be an influence for people. And so,
that's really cool. That's a cool story. And it's a good way to kind of explain to people you're still making an impact. You're still doing what it was that they would hope you would do with your life. You're just doing it in a different way, like and through a different avenue.
And I think one of your earlier questions, like, how do I reconcile being a stand-up comedian and youth pastor? Like years ago, I didn't understand that you could do it in a different way. Like, but I feel like in my 30s versus early 20s, I have a better understanding of that.
You have a better understanding now that we like open our like 30-year-old ears and actually like listen to what people are saying. We're like, oh, these work. Wow, I didn't think these ears worked. That's odd. You're supposed to listen to stuff. So if somebody wanted to find your comedy or find out where your next show is or watch your content, where can they find you?
Oh, thank you. So on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and maybe other things, I'm on @DrewDavisComedy. You can also go to www.drewdaviscomedy.com and see all the things about me. This week I'm performing in Nashville tomorrow night, and then Memphis for the next like 3 nights after that. So if you're Tennessee based, please come check it out. And just keep up. I post stuff every day, like on my Instagram and Facebook. So I'd love more people to connect with more people. So.
Yeah, and we are not related in any way, even though we're both Davis comedians in Tennessee. We're not related.
It would be so cool if we were related, but sadly not. So,
even though everybody in the South is cousins, we are not cousins. Nope. Shockingly. I don't know how that. We probably are, actually.
Yeah, maybe we are. Who knows?
I'm going to take a 23andMe. I'll get back to you. I'll let you know.
Okay. Thanks.
Well,
So,
Drew, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I really appreciate you so openly answering every
mhm,
question. One thing that I really like about you is that you don't dodge questions, you don't turn them or spin them in any way to answer in a way that you
mhm,
pre-prepared or anything like that. You're just you're straightforward and you're open about it. And I really like also how open you are about your lifestyle too. Like one of the first things we talked about when I first met you was that you are a Christian and that that's important to you. And I respect that. Like, even though I don't consider myself a religious person anymore, I have a lot of respect for your openness with your
mhm.
lifestyle. Because I feel like a lot of times when we hear that somebody's a Christian, it's because they are judging us about something, or they're like bringing it up because like, oh, I'm not going to drink tonight, like I'm a Christian or something like that.
Right. They want you
And
to know how holy they are. Yeah.
right, exactly. And you weren't like that at all. It was like, oh, this is my name, this is what I do, yada yada yada. Oh, also some interesting facts about me. I went to seminary. And to me, that was a very interesting fact. I think I even looked at you like this and I was like, can I have you on my podcast?
Yeah.
Ooh.
And meanwhile, on the other end, I was like, I really want to be on it. That's
Yeah.
yes, 100%. Let's do it tomorrow. Like
Yeah.
I'm a fan of what you do here. It has helped me just in general, like listening to other people's perspectives. So I am
Yeah.
someone who's benefited from the work that you're doing here. And I
Thank
enjoy a
you.
lot of the guests that you have.
Thank you.
So
I've always hoped that even the questions that the people who aren't religious pose on this podcast helps
mhm,
people that are religious figure out the answers to those
mhm,
questions for future,
absolutely.
you know. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope you break a leg on your shows this week. Good luck in Memphis. I'll post a
Thank
link
you.
to your website in the show notes and your socials and all that. So hopefully people will check you out. And we love having you on the podcast.
Thank
I'm
you.
probably
I
going to
enjoyed
ask you
so
back.
listening.
So
I'll be back. Let me know. You have a great rest of the day too.
see you
So
later. Have a good one.
you too. Bye.
Bye.